Elvis Presley won 3 Grammy Awards in his lifetime, and all of them were for gospel music, not rock and roll. The king spent his childhood in a small Pentecostal church in Tupelo, Mississippi, where he would stand on a chair to see the gospel singers perform. At 13, Elvis turned down a baseball glove his mother offered him for his birthday, asking for a guitar instead, after being mesmerized by the music at church. Before fame hit, young Elvis would often go to all-night gospel singing conventions, sneaking in through bathroom windows when he couldn't afford a ticket. The musical journey of Elvis Presley isn't just about hip-shaking rock and roll. It's deeply rooted in the soul-stirring sounds of gospel that shaped America itself. From his childhood church pews to recording 3 full gospel albums during his career, Elvis's connection to spiritual music wasn't just a side project. It was the heartbeat of his entire sound. Number 8. The Blackwood Brothers. The harmony-rich quartet known as the Blackwood Brothers might not be a household name today, but their influence on Elvis Presley can't be overstated. This all-male gospel group formed in 1934 in Mississippi and became one of the most popular Southern gospel acts of their time. When Elvis was just a teenager in Memphis, he would often attend Blackwood Brothers concerts, sometimes sitting in the front row and studying their every move. Their smooth, 4-part harmonies and energetic performances left a lasting impression on the young Elvis, who dreamed of singing like them long before he ever thought about rock and roll. In 1954, Elvis actually auditioned to join the Blackwood Brothers after the tragic death of 2 members in a plane crash. Though he wasn't selected, likely because his voice was too distinctive for tight quartet harmonies, this connection remained important throughout his life. Years later, when Elvis was a superstar, he would invite the group to his Graceland home for informal singing sessions that would last until dawn. The Blackwood Brothers' influence can be heard in how Elvis would later structure his own backing groups, particularly the Jordanaires, who accompanied him on many recordings. The quartet's commitment to perfect harmony and their dramatic stage presence became elements that Elvis would incorporate into his own performances. James Blackwood, one of the group's founders, once recalled, "Elvis would sit right up front at our shows, just soaking it all in. Later, when he became famous, he told me that our music had been a huge part of his childhood." This admiration went both ways. After Elvis became famous, the Blackwood Brothers would occasionally include some of his gospel songs in their own performances. The bond between Elvis and the group became even more poignant when they performed at the funeral of Elvis's mother Gladys in 1958. The quartet sang her favorite hymns, providing a moment of musical comfort during one of the most difficult times in Elvis's life. Years later, in a full-circle moment, the Blackwood Brothers would also perform at Elvis's own funeral in 1977. Number 7. Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Before Elvis, before Little Richard, before Chuck Berry, there was Sister Rosetta Tharpe, the godmother of rock and roll, who played electric guitar like nobody's business while singing gospel songs. Born in 1915 to cotton pickers in Arkansas, Rosetta began performing at age 4 and became one of the first guitarists to distort her amplifier for effect, creating a sound that would later become a cornerstone of rock music. Elvis first heard Sister Rosetta's music on the radio as a child, and her unique blend of spiritual lyrics with rhythmic innovation made a lasting impression. Her 1945 hit, "Strange Things Happening Every Day," is considered by many music historians to be the first rock and roll record, reaching the Billboard charts years before Elvis would make his own debut. What connected Elvis to Sister Rosetta's music was her ability to bring the energy and emotion of a church service to secular venues. She performed in nightclubs and theaters, breaking barriers for gospel music while maintaining her spiritual connection. This blueprint taking the fervor of church music into mainstream entertainment would become central to Elvis's approach to performance. In the 1940s, when Elvis was still a teenager, Sister Rosetta's records were played frequently in the Presley home. Her guitar-playing style, aggressive, rhythmic, and innovative, would later be echoed in the rockabilly sound that helped launch Elvis's career. Her vocal approach, too, with its distinctive slides and emotional range, influenced how Elvis would approach singing both gospel and secular music. Music historians have noted the similarities between Sister Rosetta's performance of Up Above My Head and Elvis's later gospel recordings. Both feature a driving rhythm, passionate vocals, and a sense of joyful abandonment that transcends the standard approach to religious music of their eras. Though there's no record of Elvis and Sister Rosetta ever meeting in person, her pioneering spirit lived on in his music. She had already been breaking barriers for a decade when Elvis began his career, proving that gospel-influenced music could cross racial and cultural boundaries. When Elvis caused controversy with his hip-shaking performances in the 1950s, he was in many ways walking a path that Sister Rosetta had helped clear. By bringing her gospel roots into her guitar playing and performance style, Sister Rosetta Tharpe created a template that would help Elvis transform American music. Her legacy as a gospel artist who influenced rock and roll makes her an essential piece of the Elvis Presley story. Number 6. The Stamps Quartet. If you've ever heard Elvis's later gospel recordings or his live performances from the 1970s, you've heard the rich, distinctive sound of the Stamps Quartet backing him up. This legendary gospel group, formed in 1924, became Elvis's preferred gospel backing group during the last years of his life, and their influence on his sound was profound. The relationship between Elvis and the Stamps began in earnest in 1971, when the group was invited to sing on his Grammy-winning album, He Touched Me. Elvis was immediately drawn to their deep Southern gospel sound, particularly the bass singing of J.D. Sumner, who was known for hitting some of the lowest notes ever recorded in popular music. Elvis loved J.J's bass singing, recalled Richard Sterban, who sang with the Stamps during this period before joining the Oak Ridge Boys. Sometimes in the middle of a concert, Elvis would stop everything and ask J.D. to hit his lowest note. The crowd would go wild. The Stamps didn't just back Elvis on his gospel records. They became a regular part of his live show, performing their own gospel segment during his concerts and then joining him for spiritual numbers. This integration of pure gospel music into his rock and roll shows demonstrated how Elvis never saw these as separate worlds. During the grueling schedule of his final years, Elvis would often invite the Stamps to his hotel suite after shows for gospel singing sessions that would last until dawn. These impromptu gatherings became a source of comfort and spiritual renewal for Elvis during a difficult period in his life. Former Stamps member Ed Enoch has shared numerous stories about these late-night sessions. Elvis would be physically exhausted after a show, but somehow when we started singing gospel, he'd find new energy. He knew every song, every verse, and would often quiz us on obscure gospel lyrics. The influence went beyond just the music. The Stamps represented a connection to Elvis's Southern roots and the gospel tradition that had shaped him. Their presence in his show and their friendship offstage helped Elvis maintain a link to the spiritual foundation that had been with him since childhood. After Elvis's death in 1977, the Stamps performed at his funeral, singing his favorite gospel songs as a final tribute. Their musical relationship with Elvis helped elevate Southern gospel music to new audiences and demonstrated the deep spiritual current that ran through all of Elvis's work, even his most secular performances. Number 5. Mahalia Jackson. Known as the Queen of Gospel, Mahalia Jackson's powerful voice and emotional delivery made her one of the most influential gospel singers of all time, and a significant influence on Elvis Presley's approach to spiritual music. Though they came from different worlds, she was an African-American woman born in New Orleans. He, a white boy from Mississippi. Their musical paths were connected through the transcendent power of gospel. Elvis first heard Mahalia's music as a child, likely on the radio or at community gatherings where her records were played. Her 1947 recording of "Move On Up a Little Higher" sold millions of copies and crossed over to audiences of all backgrounds, potentially reaching the young Elvis during his formative years. What Elvis would have recognized in Mahalia's singing was the same emotional intensity and spiritual connection that he witnessed in the Pentecostal church services of his youth. Mahalia didn't just sing gospel songs, she embodied them, bringing a physical and emotional commitment that made every performance feel like a direct connection to something greater. This approach to performance, the full body, full spirit, commitment to music, would become a hallmark of Elvis's own style. Like Mahalia, Elvis didn't just sing. He threw his entire being into each performance, creating an almost spiritual experience for his audiences. Music historian and gospel expert Anthony Heilbutt has noted, Mahalia's influence extended far beyond gospel circles. Her ability to communicate raw emotion through her voice taught a generation of singers, including Elvis, that technical perfection mattered less than emotional truth. Mahalia's recording of "Trouble of the World," with its deep emotional resonance and dramatic delivery, shares clear stylistic elements with Elvis's approach to songs like "How Great Thou Art." Both singers understood how to build a song from quiet introspection to soul-stirring climax. Though there's no documented meeting between Elvis and Mahalia, they moved in connected circles during the 1950s and 1960s. They shared a record label, Columbia, for a period, and both performed on national television during the early days of the medium, bringing gospel music to mainstream America. By the time Elvis recorded his first full gospel album, His Hand in Mine, in 1960, he had absorbed the lessons of Mahalia's emotional delivery and spiritual conviction. The album's approach to gospel music, respectful of tradition but unafraid to bring contemporary energy, echoed the path that Mahalia had helped forge. Number 4. The Golden Gate Quartet. When it comes to groups that revolutionized gospel music and influenced Elvis's approach to spiritual singing, few were as innovative as the Golden Gate Quartet. Formed in the 1930s, this African-American group transformed traditional Jubilee quartet singing by adding elements of jazz, swing, and sophisticated harmonies to create what became known as Jubilee Gospel. The Golden Gate Quartet was among the first gospel groups to achieve mainstream success, performing at President Roosevelt's inauguration in 1941 and appearing in Hollywood films. Their polished, rhythmic approach to gospel music helped bridge the gap between spiritual music and popular entertainment, a balance that Elvis would later master in his own career. Elvis discovered their music during his teenage years, likely through radio broadcasts and records. What would have caught his attention was their rhythmic innovation, the way they could make a spiritual song swing and move with a sophistication that was rare in gospel music of that era. Their influence can be heard in Elvis's approach to up-tempo gospel songs like "So High" and "I Believe in the Man in the Sky." The way Elvis and his backing vocalists would lock into tight syncopated rhythms while maintaining crystal clear harmony shows the clear imprint of the Golden Gate Quartet's pioneering style. Former Golden Gate Quartet member Orlandus Wilson once commented after hearing Elvis's gospel work, "You can hear he studied the old quartet recordings, the way he phrases and the way he builds a song that comes from gospel quartet tradition." The group's ability to make religious music accessible to secular audiences without compromising its spiritual message provided a template that Elvis would follow throughout his career. Though Elvis never recorded with the Golden Gate Quartet, their musical DNA is present in his gospel arrangements and his approach to vocal group dynamics. What made the Golden Gate Quartet particularly influential was their willingness to evolve and adapt traditional material for contemporary audiences, updating arrangements while respecting the core message of the songs. This approach mirrored Elvis's own musical philosophy, as he frequently took traditional hymns and gospel songs and reimagined them for modern listeners. By the time Elvis began recording gospel music in the studio, the Golden Gate Quartet had already spent decades proving that gospel music could be sophisticated, rhythmically complex, and appealing to diverse audiences. Their pioneering work helped create a musical environment where Elvis's gospel recordings could be both commercially successful and artistically resected. Number 3. The Statesman Quartet. If there was a single gospel group that had the most direct and visible influence on Elvis Presley's performance style, it was undoubtedly the Statesman Quartet. Formed in 1948, this group revolutionized gospel music by bringing unprecedented energy and showmanship to their performances, elements that would later become hallmarks of Elvis's own stage presence. As a teenager in Memphis, Elvis would attend Statesman concerts whenever possible, often standing near the stage to study their movements and vocal techniques. The group's lead singer, Jake Hess, became one of Elvis's most significant vocal influences, with his smooth delivery and distinctive vibrato clearly echoed in Elvis's ballad singing throughout his career. But it was the Statesman's dynamic pianist and MC Hovey Lister who may have had the most profound impact on Elvis's physical performance style. Lister was known for his energetic stage presence, jumping, running across the stage and displaying an enthusiasm that was revolutionary for gospel music at that time. "I watched how Hovey Lister moved on stage," Elvis once told a reporter. "He'd move out from behind the piano and get right up in front of the audience. People loved it." This approach, bringing physical showmanship to spiritual music, gave Elvis permission to develop his own energetic stage persona. The connection between Elvis and the Statesman became a lifelong one. Years later, when Elvis was a global superstar, he would still attend Statesman concerts when his schedule allowed. After the shows, he would often invite the group back to his hotel room to sing gospel songs until the early morning hours. Jake Hess recalled, "Elvis would call us whenever we were in the same city. After midnight, he'd want us to come over and sing. He knew every gospel song you could name." This genuine love for gospel music and respect for its performers remained constant throughout Elvis's life, even as his fame reached unprecedented heights. The Statesman's bass singer, Jim Big Chief Wetherington, was known for his energetic movements on stage, sometimes even incorporating dance elements into gospel performances. Music historians have noted similarities between some of Wetherington's movements and Elvis's later stage moves, suggesting another direct influence on the King's performance style. When Elvis formed the vocal groups that would back him throughout his career, he specifically looked for singers who could recreate the tight harmonies and energy he had admired in the Statesman. This gospel quartet's DNA became embedded in Elvis's music, even when he was performing rock and roll or pop songs. Number 2. Reverend W. Herbert Brewster. Among Elvis's gospel influences, Reverend W. Herbert Brewster might be one of the least known to casual fans, but his impact on American gospel music, and through it on Elvis Presley, was profound. Born in 1897 in Tennessee, Brewster was a Baptist minister, joker, and civil rights activist whose compositions revolutionized gospel music in the mid-20th century. Brewster wrote over 200 gospel songs, including classics like Move On Up, A Little Higher, made famous by Mahalia Jackson, and Surely God is Able. His East Trigg Baptist Church in Memphis became a center for gospel music innovation, attracting both black and white listeners despite the segregation of the era. Young Elvis, always drawn to powerful music regardless of its source, was among the white Memphians who would sometimes attend services at East Trigg Baptist or listen to Brewster's weekly radio broadcasts. These experiences exposed Elvis to the emotional depth and musical innovation of black gospel tradition during his formative years. Brewster's compositions were revolutionary for their time, blending traditional gospel themes with contemporary concerns and more complex musical structures. His approach to songwriting, bringing fresh energy to spiritual themes, would later be reflected in Elvis's own approach to gospel music, which respected tradition while feeling thoroughly contemporary. Music historian Charles Hughes has noted, Brewster created gospel songs that addressed the full human experience, spiritual longing, social justice, personal struggle. This broader approach to gospel themes can be heard in the material Elvis chose for his own gospel recordings. Though Elvis never recorded Brewster's compositions directly, the minister's influence can be heard in Elvis's approach to gospel music, particularly in how he brought emotional intensity and contemporary relevance to traditional spiritual themes. Brewster's innovation within the gospel tradition helped create a musical environment where Elvis's own gospel recordings could bridge traditional and modern approaches. Brewster lived long enough to see Elvis become a global phenomenon and to observe how elements of the black gospel tradition he had helped nurture had influenced the king of rock and roll. In later interviews, Brewster acknowledged this cultural exchange with characteristic grace, noting that music had always been a force that could transcend racial boundaries. The connection between Brewster and Elvis represents a larger pattern in American music history, the ongoing cultural conversation between black and white musical traditions that created new forms of expression. Through his attendance at East Trigg Baptist and his listening to Brewster's radio broadcasts, Elvis absorbed lessons about musical communication and spiritual expression that would inform his entire career. Number 1. The Pentecostal Church Experience. If we trace Elvis Presley's gospel influences back to their source, we ultimately arrive at the small Assembly of God Church in East Tupelo, Mississippi, where Elvis and his family attended services throughout his childhood. This Pentecostal congregation provided Elvis's first and most formative musical experiences that would shape his approach to performance for the rest of his life. The first Assembly of God Church that the Presley family attended was known for its emotionally expressive worship style. Services often included energetic singing, spontaneous testimonies, speaking in tongues, and even physical manifestations of religious fervor. Young Elvis witnessed worshipers being moved to dance, shout, and fall to the ground in religious ecstasy, all accompanied by driving rhythmic music. In the Pentecostal church, music wasn't just an accompaniment to worship, it was worship itself, explained Elvis's former backup singer and gospel musician Gordon Stoker. That's where Elvis learned that music could be a direct emotional and spiritual experience. The church's music director, Frank Smith, recalled young Elvis sitting near the front, completely absorbed in the music. His eyes would just light up when the singing started. You could tell even then that the music was reaching something deep inside him. What Elvis experienced in those wooden pews was a form of musical expression, where the barriers between performer and audience disappeared. Congregation members didn't just passively listen to music. They participated in it, responding with their voices and bodies. This participatory approach to music would later become a hallmark of Elvis's own performances, where the emotional connection with the audience was paramount. The Pentecostal musical tradition also introduced Elvis to a physical approach to singing. In these churches, singers used their entire bodies to express the music, swaying, moving their hands, and physically conveying the emotion of the songs. The famous Elvis moves that would later scandalize and excite America had their roots not in an attempt to be provocative, but in the physical expression of music he had witnessed in church. Elvis's mother, Gladys, was particularly devoted to the church and its music. She would often sing hymns around the house, introducing Elvis to the melodies and lyrics that would stay with him throughout his life. Many who knew the family have suggested that Elvis's close bond with his mother further strengthened his connection to gospel music. The Pentecostal tradition also exposed Elvis to a vocal technique called holy whispering, a soft, breathy vocal approach used in certain contemplative moments of worship. Music journalists have noted similarities between this technique and Elvis's famous soft singing approach on ballads like Love Me Tender. When Elvis bought his first guitar at age 11, among the first songs he learned to play were the hymns and gospel songs from church. These formed the foundation of his musical education, teaching him about harmony, rhythm, and emotional expression before he ever encountered blues or country music. Later, in his career, when Elvis would gather friends and fellow musicians for informal singing sessions, he would invariably turn to the gospel songs of his youth. Those who were present at these gatherings often remarked that Elvis seemed most at peace and most authentically himself when singing these spiritual songs. The impact of these early church experiences extended beyond just the music. The Pentecostal services Elvis attended emphasized personal testimony and direct emotional connection, elements that would later characterize Elvis's approach to performance. Even at the height of his fame, Elvis maintained the ability to make each person in a massive audience feel as though he was singing directly to them, a skill first observed in the powerful preachers and singers of his childhood church. As music historian Peter Gurulnik has noted, the Pentecostal church gave Elvis a model for how music could transport both performer and audience to a different emotional. And spirituals, the country, the rock and roll, was filtered through that initial understanding of music's kaji power. Elvis's childhood pastor, James Hamill, once reflected on Elvis's musical journey. He took the feeling of our church services with him. Even when he was singing rock and roll, you could hear the church in his voice that never left him. Indeed, even at the height of his fame and success, Elvis would return to gospel music again and again. He recorded 3 full gospel albums during his career: His Hand in Mine, 1960, How Great Thou Art, 1967, and He Touched Me, 1972. Each of these albums reflected the continuing influence of his early church experiences, translated through his maturing musical sensibility. During his famous 1968 comeback special, amid the leather-clad rock and roll performances that rejuvenated his career, Elvis included a gospel segment. In this intimate setting, singing songs like "Where Could I Go But to the Lord?", Elvis demonstrated that gospel music remained at the core of his musical identity. Perhaps most tellingly, during the difficult final years of his life, as health problems and personal struggles mounted, Elvis increasingly turned to gospel music for comfort and expression. His last Grammy Award came for his live recording of How Great Thou Art in 1974, bringing him full circle to the music that had first captured his imagination as a child in Tupelo. When Elvis died in 1977, the funeral service at Graceland featured the gospel songs he had loved throughout his life. As the Stantz Quartet and other gospel singers performed, they were not just providing a soundtrack for mourning. They were acknowledging the spiritual foundation that had shaped Elvis's entire musical journey The boy who had once stood on a chair to see the gospel singers in that small Pentecostal church had carried those sounds and that spirit with him through a revolutionary career. Though Elvis Presley may be remembered primarily as the king of rock and roll, the true throne from which his music reigned was built in the gospel tradition, a tradition he never abandoned and always honored, from his first recordings to his final performances. In the words of gospel great Jake Hess, who influenced Elvis and later sang at his funeral, Elvis never really left gospel music. It was the center that his whole musical world revolved around. Everything else he did. The rock full stayed with him from the beginning to the end.